for tuning in to Exeter TV. The meeting will be starting shortly. While we wait, let's learn more about Exeter TV. Exeter TV is the town's public and government access channels, available on Comcast channels 98 and 22. Channel 98 is your channel. If you have an idea for a program, want to host your own talk show, or submit a film, we're here to get your content on television. On Channel 22, we bring you live and replay coverage of government meetings and other town updates. A third channel, Blue Hawk Media, is operated by SAU 16 and can be found on Channel 13, with all your school sports, events, and meetings. You can watch Exeter TV online at exeternh.tv, Apple TV, and on Roku. Find us on social media for extra content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell to get notified about live streams and new content. Tune in to our platforms every other Friday to watch the Exeter Bi-Weekly Report with recaps of recent events, updates from town departments, and messages from nonprofits in your area. If you head to our website, exeternh.tv, we invite you to sign up to our newsletter to receive monthly updates about new content, upcoming meetings, and more. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch Exeter TV and hope that you tune in to our other content as well.
October meeting of the Exeter Zoning Board of Adjustment. My name is Kevin Baum. I'm the chair of the board. With me tonight is alternate Christopher Merrill, alternate Ann Sermon, Bob Pryor, vice chair Bob Pryor, Martha Pennell, and Rick Thielbar. First order of business tonight is the application of Amy and Nicholas Cregan for a special exception pursuant to Article 7, Section 4.2, Schedule 1, which is permitted uses, as well as Article 5, Section 5.2, to permit a residential conversion for one additional unit within the existing structure at 14 Union Street. Also, for the same property is a variance from Article 4, Section 4.2, Schedule 1, permitted uses to permit the proposed conversion with less than the required minimum lot area. I assume you will present these together, but it's your discretion.
I'm going to take this off. That's okay.
You are welcome to.
It's just my glasses are going to fog up. My thought would be that what I'll do is to present the variance application first, and then move on directly into the special exception. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap in terms of the facts and so forth, if that's acceptable to the board.
I think that makks the most sense.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, do you want to decide who's voting?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Thank you.
So we have 3 regular members and 3 alternates.
Okay, so we'll need 2 alternates
On the first case.
on the first case, and actually we'll need, and then more on the second. I am, just so the board is aware, I'll be stepping down on the second case. So whoever doesn't get to vote on the first will be able to vote on the second. Why don't we have Chris and Ann on the first case, if that's okay, Martha, and then we'll
Sure.
just to go in order, and then you can jump in on the second, and you are welcome to participate, but won't be a voting member. So, thank you. If you're ready to proceed, please.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Sharon Summers. I'm with Donahue, Tucker, and Chindella. I'm here tonight representing Amy and Nicholas Cregan of 14 Union Street. Before I begin, I want to just a couple of quick housekeeping matter. Through an error on the part of my office, we over-notified in terms of the abutters. There are, in fact, only 3 abutters, and they are Mary Katie Trustee, and that's the map and lot number 7343, the Exeter School District, which owns the I guess it's a daycare area next to the Creegans, and that's 73232. I'm sorry, Mary Katie is not on. I didn't even look at my own writing here. So it's the Exeter School District, and then 73254, which is the Hansel Lynn Revocable Trust, 15 Union Street. And then the last is the immediate abutter, which is the Sanak, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, family at 12 Union Street, and they are 73241. So my apologies for any confusion or inconvenience that I'm causing the board. Obviously, these are all members of the public, anybody who did receive those notices, but for purposes of the legal qualifications, those 3 that I just mentioned are the only ones that constitute abutters.
Ms. Summers, 73241 is not on the abutter list.
I understand that.
Okay.
And what we did do today, just to let you know what happened with that, is that we had previously had contact with the Sanak family, and so what I did was to, and they have no objections to this proposal, and so I quickly dashed off a letter to them confirming that and confirming that they have no objection to the lack of formal notice. That's been provided into the record today. So, with that in mind, let me begin. We are here tonight because we have a 2-bedroom apartment in the basement, which has been used as a short-term rental and was the cause of some concern as expressed to the town. Our response to this was to immediately meet with the town to figure out a way to resolve this, and that resulted in the application that you have before you, which includes a variance and a special exception. What we seek tonight is to have a second dwelling recognized, which is the two-bedroom apartment in the basement, and to use that for long-term rental purposes only as part of an approved second dwelling. The first dwelling, the primary dwelling, which is going to be upstairs, will be owner-occupied by the Kriegans, and their intention is to do this in terms of the long-term rental piece, to market it towards most likely working professionals who may be nearby. They're thinking that traveling nurses or some other similar kind of thing where people may have to be in the area for long-term stays but don't wish to stay in a hotel, or they have previously rented to parents of PEA students who happen to need to be here in town for whatever reasons. I would also note that the Kriegans' intent is to not necessarily have this be rented out at all times, because they have family come and visit quite often, and so there may be periods of time in which there will be nobody other than family members down in the basement. So, to move forward with this proposal, we need a special exception, and in turn, in order to get the special exception, we need a variance, and that variance is because the lot size is shy by 723.6 square feet of what is required under the ordinance. So with me tonight, and I'd like to address that variance first, are Amy and Nicholas Cregan, and they will be happy to certainly answer any questions, as will I. What I'd like to do is to briefly address the nature and the aspects of the property, and then to discuss the legal criteria relevant to, in the first instance, the variance, and then we'll move on to the special exception. And then, once I have presented all that information, I would ask that both of the requests for the relief, the variance and the special exception, be granted as presented tonight. So, the property itself is located at 14 Union Street. It's in the R2 zoning district. It contains 8,276.4 square feet. It is a lot of record. It has a 1.5-story building on it, and on the first floor is approximately 1,400 square feet of living area on the first and second half-story, and then in the basement, 980 square feet of finished living area. In the primary residence, which is what we're calling the first and the second floor, are 3 bedrooms. In the basement, there are 2 for a total of 5 bedrooms. The existing structure was built in 2009 and has been continuously used as a residence since that time. The property is served by municipal water and septic. The backyard is fenced and/or landscaped with shade trees and shrubs of a variety of types. There are 2 driveways on the property which provide parking for 5 cars in total, which is 1 more technically than is needed under the ordinance. And as is shown in the tax map that was provided to you, you can see that the lot itself is small, but that the structure on it is a small house which is located quite close to the front of the street, and that there's quite a substantial amount of open space behind the structure. And in fact, we exceed the amount of the open space required quite a lot. We have 5,895 square feet of open space, where 3,310 is required. So we have quite a bit of overage there. There are no modifications that are proposed to the building. So there will be no change in the exterior of the building as a result of the grant of this proposal. And that pretty much sets up the discussion of the property aspects. With regard to the The variance, as I said earlier, we are seeking a special exception, and we comply with all elements of the special exception, with the exception of this lot size. So moving to the variance criteria that are set forth in my written materials, the first variance criteria, of course, is the fact that granting the variance is not going to be contrary to the public interest. As is stated in the materials, there is no threat to the public health, safety, and general welfare if this variance is granted. This is taking an existing single-family residence with existing bedrooms in the basement and making it into a long-term rental unit. No modifications, as I said earlier, no physical alterations to the interior of the building, and therefore there's really not going to be any kind of visual or physical impacts upon the property or the surrounding neighborhood. In addition to that, there's no alteration of the essential character of the neighborhood by granting this variance. As we note in the materials, there are a number of other properties that are already used as 2- and 3-family homes, in addition to some which are single-family homes. The proposed use is in keeping with the prevailing uses of other similarly situated properties within the same district and, in fact, the neighborhood. So with regard to that, we believe we've satisfied that particular variance criteria. The second criteria is whether or not the spirit of the ordinance is preserved. As you know, that criteria is viewed and analyzed in the same fashion as the public interest criteria, and therefore, based upon the evidence that I've just read, we satisfy that criteria as well. The third criteria is substantial justice. And with regard to that one, the denial of the variance is not going to yield any particular gain to the general public, whereas if the variance is denied, it will result in a loss to my clients. I would note that the clients did, upon learning of this issue with the short-term rentals and that that's not a permitted use, took it upon themselves to come in and try to rectify the situation right away. And they took down their advertisements and so forth for the short-term rentals and really just trying to get on top of this issue. We believe that denying the variance is going to deprive the owners of the best use of this house, and also will deprive them of an additional income stream that would be able to be derived from using the basement apartment as a long-term rental. The next item is the values of the surrounding properties will not be diminished. As I stated earlier, in the first instance, the property is not going to have any modifications to it. So for all intents and purposes, by granting this variance, the residential use of the property is going to remain the same, and it's not going to have any impact on the surrounding properties. 2 driveways already exist to service any kind of cars that utilize the property. As stated above, there are other properties in the neighborhood that are already have multiple dwellings on them, so that it's not going to create an anomaly in this neighborhood. I would note as well, as I stated at the beginning of this discussion, that the Kriegans are very mindful of the fact that one of the requirements of the special exception in order to get that is that this be owner-occupied. They take that obligation very seriously. They are going to be there, so they're going to be, frankly, kind of picky about who they get in there as tenants. And so I think that one of the aspects of why we would satisfy this particular criteria is that we're going to be careful landlords to the extent that the property is in fact used as a rental. And then the last criteria under the variance is the hardship criteria. So on this one, we believe that the property is unique and has specialized conditions. As was pointed out earlier, if you look at the tax map in particular, the layout and the location of the residence and the garage on the lot, the number of off-street parking spaces provided, and the locations of the existing paved driveways do make this different than other similarly situated properties, which may not have all of those aspects to them, but also at the same time have multiple dwellings on them. And we provided some examples of that in some of the, the exhibits that we noted. In addition to that, this property is unique in the sense that it is substandard in terms of size relative to other lots in the area. However, it is in many respects, it is clearly suited to being a two residential unit property because of the fact that it's really very innocuous in appearance, and it also has two driveways, lots of parking space, etc. We believe that owing to the special conditions of the property, that there is no fair and substantial relationship between the public purpose of Note B, which was the triggering event requiring this variance to begin with, which seems to, and that, by the way, that seems to have been adopted in 2002. It's not entirely clear from the ordinance what the purpose is, but I think it's a fair assumption to think that it was designed to prevent or to lessen congestion and overcrowding and so forth. As applied to this particular property, however, given the fact that the residential dwelling is already in existence, it's contained within the existing structure, there's going to be no changes to that, and the fact that we have, in fact, an excess of open space on the property, we believe that there's no fair and substantial relationship between denying the variance, particularly where there's only 700 and some odd square feet of difference here. And in addition to, well, the third aspect is whether or not, well, actually, I take that back. As I started to say, there's 723.6 square feet that we are shy of in terms of compliance. And we don't believe that even if that additional 723 square feet was in existence on this particular lot, that it would do a great deal towards meeting the purpose or the standard of that particular ordinance. Finally, with regard to the third element of the hardship criteria, the proposed use is reasonable. There are various residential conversions are permitted in this R2 district, and the proposed use of a second dwelling is commonplace throughout the surrounding neighborhood. We identified at least 6 other properties that are either 2 or 3 family residences on Union Street alone. So we believe that between the current configuration of the property and the fact that other properties have similar uses, that the proposed use is in fact reasonable. So with that, I think what I'd like to do is to first ask if the board has any questions or concerns about the variance criteria that have been presented, and ask any questions that you may wish of my clients, and then I'm trying to think here whether or not I should go immediately into the discussion of the special exception, or allow you to deliberate and vote on the variance first.
Why don't we start, just to keep it clean, why don't we start on the variance?
That's my inclination, too.
And then we can allow public comment on that as well.
Right.
I suspect that most of the public comment will be aimed at both in general.
Right.
But then I think it's cleaner that way. And I do have a couple questions as well.
Sure.
If you will. One is, I was just curious, this is a request for a conversion. An accessory dwelling unit was another option. I was wondering if that was considered and just why. Neither seems to be met. It's very close. So I'm just curious, in part because one of the differences between the two is that for an accessory dwelling unit, the dwelling units must remain owner occupied, whether they're rented or not. And as I read the conversion, it appears to be owner occupied only if there's a rental unit, meaning if if it became a condominium, there could be two separate owners. I mean, I guess in that case, they would be well, they wouldn't have to be owner occupied at that point.
You know, I may ask, I was not involved in those early discussions to try to pinpoint accessory dwelling unit as opposed to residential conversion. I may ask either Amy and Nicholas to weigh in on that, or perhaps Doug, as to why that particular one was chosen rather than the other.
And I think more to the point, you mentioned the sensitivity to owner occupancy. So that seems to be the primary difference in my mind, and I wonder if that would be something that, assuming we get that far down the road, if that would be a condition that the owners would consider, is just having it be an absolute owner occupancy condition.
I can consult with them on that. I think that probably would.
Yeah.
That's all right.
We were under the understanding that was the rule anyway, so,
Okay.
yeah.
And then the next, and this is more of a general question, and maybe one of you can answer it, is I'd like a better sense of the I guess the layout of the unit, how the ground floor unit is going to be accessed.
Interact with the basement.
Interact, is there, right?
Why don't, Amy, can you?
If you wouldn't mind coming to
the microphone.
we can hear you in the room if
Oh,
you're not
sorry.
on the microphone, but they can't hear you on the live stream.
Oh, got it. So I'm Amy Cregan. So the house, like Sharon had mentioned, there is two driveways on either side. One with a garage that we use and we access through the front door or through the garage. The other's on the other side, the driveway, and then that leads at the end of the driveway. There's a door down to the basement on there. So it has separate access from how we access. It's downstairs, and then the full unit is in the basement, and we're on the main and second floor. Does that answer your question?
I think it does.
Okay.
And any connection between, or is there any connection intended between the two
No.
units?
No.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I was hoping to find in here, and maybe this is a question for Doug, if you don't mind, before I turn it over to a question for Sharon. How do we define long-term versus short-term rental?
It's not.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say anything longer than 6 months.
Is long-term.
That's
Ms. Summers, your description of the intended tenants sounded exactly like the kind of tenants that the applicant would have had under an Airbnb, which is parents of PEA students who are visiting town, and they're not visiting, what they call traveling nurses who are here. And you also mentioned that it's not going to be occupied the entire time because family members are going to be coming in periodically, which does not sound to me like a long-term rental situation. It sounds like authorization for doing what's happening right now.
I'm going to let my client speak to that for a moment, but what I was trying to convey was the fact that the apartment may simply not be rented out from time to time. I mean, if the Creegans have the grandma and grandpa come to visit for, say, a month in the summer or something like that, then they simply won't rent out the apartment during that time, and they will simply be having family members visit in the same fashion that any of us have family members visiting at our home. They just have the benefit of having a separate private kind of apartment in which those people can stay when they're visiting. So I don't think that has any relevance to the discussion that we're talking about right now. I'll let her talk about for a moment the past history of what they have done and perhaps what they're thinking to do, and then I'll get back to Doug's point in just a moment.
So in the past, what we had and what was our intention with a long-term stay was a traveling nurse. We had them this past year before we knew that any of this came about, and they stayed for 3 months. And that's usually, I think they actually ended up extending, I think by a month or so after that. And then also with the PEA parent was a stay for a semester. She wanted to be close to her daughter who was attending school. I also think there might have been some issue with her being able to stay at the school because of COVID and restrictions and not having the space. So she was also was staying with us as well, the student. We were not intending to do the short-term weekend Airbnb any longer. Since we had that knowledge, we stopped doing that, and that's no longer our intention. I guess what Sharon was saying too about our family, we have young kids, we have grandparents visiting. All our family lives in Canada actually, so they come down for long periods of time. So if there was if we had something that would work with the traveling nurse for 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, then that might work, and maybe we leave the summer open for our family to come. And it just, our intention isn't to have someone there sign like a year lease every year, have someone in there. It would be a long-term but not permanent all the time, have someone in there, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
And if I may, as you have correctly noted, there is no definition in the ordinance as to what long-term is. I don't agree or disagree with Doug. I know that when I never disagree with Doug.
I do all the time. But
I do too.
It's not in my best interest to do so.
Nor in mine. I do know that this is an issue that comes up from time to time when I'm drafting, say, condominium documents. Yeah. And 6 months seems to be, or 3 months seems to be some sort of a magic cutoff as to what could be construed as long-term. But it is to some extent kind of a judgment call, and I think we can certainly have a discussion about that tonight if that's going to provide some degree of comfort to the board in terms of getting consensus as to what we mean by that.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but it may be possible that might come up later on. But I simply wanted to raise the issue that I don't think we agree on what's short-term and what's long-term.
Right. Okay.
Ann?
I had a similar, that was the exact same question actually I had, because when I first read this before I came to the meeting, I had one idea of it, which would have been more like what you just described, a year lease anyway. Because to me, then it starts to sound like it is more like a hotel or a bed and breakfast or something like that. And that would make me understand why the neighborhood would be concerned. Because in a way, you'd almost rather have someone who becomes part of the neighborhood who rents for a year or 2 years or whatever. So to me, it's a whole different thing. And again, I'm the new member of this group, so a lot of my questions have, not just for you, but I think that's key to this whole thing, is this long-term rental. It's my humble opinion on this at the moment, because that's different than, like, to me, the definition of a multifamily, where you have people who rent duplexes or multifamilies and they stay and become part of the neighborhood. Again, not maybe our purview, but I just wanted to.
No,
that did make that makes a big difference to me.
Any other questions? Rick?
I'm the same problem, that what are we calling short-term, what are we calling long-term?
Okay.
Nothing in here is going to.
No.
I didn't think so.
My understanding is ultimately it's largely at Doug's discretion and determination, because it's not defined, but
Interesting.
Is it something that ultimately, if we got as far as we get, it can be conditioned in the vote, in the motion?
it could potentially be conditioned. I think it's worth discussing, and I think the applicant may have been just discussing it right now, or we certainly would entertain if they wanted to take a time out and discuss it at any point. But Ms. Summers, did you have anything to add?
Not at this point. I do think I would like to speak with the clients further to just try to get a handle on this, to see if there's some way that we can make it work for them and also still be comfortable with the board. I don't know if the board wants to go into a public comment at this point so that I can have a minute to talk with them, or because it doesn't appear that the board members have any more questions for me.
I would agree. I think that makes sense. If the board has no more questions, then I'm going to open it up to public comment.
And then I'll come back and revisit this issue.
Yes, and you'll have a chance to address any comments that were made. I would ask now if any members of the public want to come and speak on this application, either for, to, against, please come up. I would ask that you just state your name and your address, and then we are only speaking on the variance now, but I welcome any general comments you have. I think it's going to make sense to address them all once. If you want to come back up for the special exception, you'll have an opportunity if we get there. So would any members of the public like to speak? If you'd like, come right up to the microphone.
Good evening. My name is Joanna Rahm. I actually live on Front Street, but on the corner of Front and Union. And a significant portion of our property, the majority of it, is actually on Union Street. Our backyard flows, and we have probably one of the larger ones there. I've lived in Exeter 17 years, and we have spent the last 6 in this house, which we moved to specifically, having spent time in the neighborhood and coming to love it as a very special street in town. And if you know Union Street, yes, it does have some multifamilies at one end. That number has grown because Garfield Extension has now become Union Street. But the side of Union Street that is closer to Front Street is all single-family homes. And my issue with this is nothing against Amy and Nick, who I think are lovely neighbors. Nice addition. They have beautiful children. It's the fact that I worry about making this change that will stay with the property over time. And, nobody knows what their long-term plans are. That's, only here, we're here talking about things that they want to do while they're living in the house. But support of this variance and making it a multifamily, ultimately, is what it sounds like, is really going to change the fabric of the neighborhood. Adding another structure that's a owner-occupied second dwelling home, I feel strongly will change the fabric of our wonderful back doors. Everybody runs in and out of their houses with kids and adults neighborhood. And to speak to the history of this second driveway and the way the house looks, that was there by a previous owner who had an auxiliary vehicle parked on the other side of their home, because you can't leave things on the street, and it's a very small street, and it is congested, and we do have issues with people speeding down and people that are not as invested in our neighborhood, keeping it as precious as it is. So I think that as much as Ms. Summers has said there is a little impact, that is not necessarily true over the long term.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak?
Hi, I'm Barb Pollard. I'm on 8 Union, so I'm a couple doors down from Nick and Amy.
Pollard?
Pollard, P-O-L-L-A-R-D. I'm with Joanna. I'm just worried about the landscape of the neighborhood. I know that Nick and Amy, when they're owning this, that they would get really considerate renters and whatnot. But if they sell the house, then we don't know what's going to happen. We do, on our half of the block, it is all single-family homes, and we are super, super close. So I'm just opposing this in that sense. So there's no ill feelings, and I hate doing this with neighbors because I really do enjoy having them as neighbors. So there we have it.
Thank you. I'm sorry, please
I'll just
come
speak
up.
really briefly. I reiterate those sentiments. The one thing that I would point out.
I'm sorry, before you, would you just give your
I'm
name
sorry.
and your address?
Sure. Abby Sparling. I'm at 13 Union Street. I'm right across the street from Nick and Amy. And I also have little kids just like them. And so one of the things that we've noticed is the additional traffic when there was some rental units in there. And that's been troubling because you can only park on one side of our street. So it means that there's people parking on our street, sitting there and affecting the traffic flow on Union Street. And on the side that would be rented out, it's one parking spot. And so it's disproportionate the way that that's represented, I think. It's one on one side and four on the other side, on Nick and Amy's side. So I would be worried with it being a 2-bedroom, there'd only be enough room for one car, would be a consideration there for me. And again, the same idea there. I mean, the long-term rental sounds like a better scenario to me than a short-term rental, but it concerns me about the turnover of the home if it gets sold and who the future owners are and how they manage it, because they have done a lovely job of maintaining the property and managing it well to this point.
Thank you. Looks like that's it for public speakers. I would also just like to note, we did receive a letter in opposition. That letter was from two of the speakers tonight, Barbara Pollard, Joanne Rahm. It looks like the other residents, as well as the Kara Siegel at 11 Union Street, and I can't read his name or her name, but 11 Union Street as well. So similar comments. I just wanted to note for the record that we had received this, and it will be included in the record. If there are no more comments from the public, I'd like to invite the applicant to come back and address any of those comments or make any closing remarks.
Yeah, I would. I think that the board and the abutters need to kind of maintain some context as to the variance request, which is, I mean, frankly, but for this lot size issue, I think we'd be going directly to the special exception application. And I believe that we do meet the special exception criteria. I think that one of the things that's been discussed is whether or not there are other, and this is not a multifamily, by the way, it's a two-family. That's an important distinction. One of or several of the comments indicated that there are no other two families in the area, and that's simply not true. As a matter of course, lot 241, which is right next door, which is an immediate abutter, that is a two-family. And some of the other properties that we mentioned in the application materials are also two families. For example, lot 243 has a two-family, and these are from the town tax records. Map 252 is a three-family. Lot 244 is a three-family. Union Street, and this may be what one of the speakers was referring to, way down the road on 251, that is a 4 to 7 unit, so that's quite large. But then there's another one, lot 250, which is also a two-family. So I think that the accuracy of some of those statements is just not there, and that's supported by the exhibits that we submitted as part of our variance application. So I think to suggest that somehow or another this is going to alter the neighborhood is simply not the case. Now, whether that driveway was put there by a prior owner or for some other reason, I don't think really matters, because what it does do is that it's going to service the ability for this particular apartment to be able to effectively utilize the parking needs. If there are people that are occasionally in the street, that happens on any street, with any house. I think also with regard to the owner-occupied aspect of this, That is a requirement of the special exception. So if this board chooses to grant a special exception, to get that, this will need to be owner-occupied. And the Kriegans have already offered earlier in the discussion to have that as a condition of approval, that they will continue to have it as an owner-occupied. So I believe that whatever concern there is that this is going to turn into some sort of an irresponsibly operated or absentee landlord situation, or even with subsequent owners after they leave, is just not there, because it's going to have to be owner-occupied. Finally, in discussions with them just now, I know there was concern about the length of time, and we would agree to a 6-month period of time, which I can speak to this from my own experience, again, working with numerous condominium documents and condominium associations. That seems to be a good rule of thumb in order to kind of get to the sort of the continuity and avoiding the revolving door sense that's going to be needed in the community, because it does sound like this is a tight-knit neighborhood. But I do think six months is an appropriate period of time, and that's not to say that it couldn't be longer, depending upon what the circumstances are of a particular tenant. But I do think it also provides them with the flexibility that they may wish to have from time to time, so that their relatives from Canada can come down, say, for example, for the summer. So I think that that's a good compromise, and it will also still provide the kind of security that the neighborhood and perhaps this board is looking for as well. So I guess what I would suggest, it seems as if the concerns are really twofold, that somehow this is going to change the character of the neighborhood, and I would suggest to you that there is absolutely no physical evidence that that's going to happen, because the thing is already there, and all of the infrastructure is there in terms of the driveway and so forth, and there are other 2- and 3-family houses already immediately in that neighborhood. So I don't think this is going to become an anomaly out there. Secondly, by virtue of the fact that the owner-occupied requirement is part of the special exception criteria, and that we have agreed to do that, I think that provides a degree of security and safety for everyone concerned. And then lastly, because of the discussion that's taken place tonight about long-term, which by everyone's admission, that's really not a defined term in the town ordinance. We are certainly willing to compromise and come up with a period of time that we think is reasonable, so that there will be a sense that there's not strangers coming in and out of the neighborhood, and yet will provide some degree of flexibility for the Kriegans in terms of being allowed to have a rental, but also being able to use it for family visitations as they so choose. So those are my thoughts.
Mr. Pryor, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the concession on the 6 months. I appreciate that. And this is kind of a obnoxious question. I'll apologize in advance, Ms. Summers. When you were renting, I'll direct it to the applicants rather than to Ms. Summers. When you were renting to what they call traveling nurses, or a traveling nurse, was the contract that you were signing with the individual who was coming in, or with a company who was then putting people into that space?
Sorry, let's take this. We used a site that is specific to traveling nurses who are looking for furnished rentals for whatever their contract is, which is usually 3, 6, or more months. So it was with a company that we found them through, but the contract lease was with the specific nurse.
So you weren't signing a lease with Fred's House of Traveling Nurses, and
No.
they would send somebody else in?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to, maybe it wasn't an obnoxious question. It was a clarification, how's that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant?
I did have one real, and this may
Go
have been
ahead.
answered before. Was it converted before you owned it? Was the prior owner have it?
She says yes.
Yes, okay. And did they rent it out? I mean, it converted
More than
to,
no.
no, so it was, when we say conversion, again, I don't, is it like a kitchen and bathroom? It's a whole full, like, mini house down there. Like, it's a full in-law apartment. So they converted for somebody, but they didn't rent it out?
Yeah, actually.
We don't know what they did.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, I don't know what they did, I guess.
Listen to your counsel.
But it was all there when we moved in. There was a kitchenette that was existing, bedrooms that were existing, the driveway, the separate access, everything was existing, the bathroom. We didn't make any, we didn't add anything to make it the apartment that it is. We just fixed it up a bit.
So it wasn't, the home wasn't marketed to you as a home that had rental income involved or potential for rental income?
I mean, when we purchased the home, we were told that it was a legal apartment.
Okay,
downstairs.
That's what I'm getting at. That's exactly what
we later found out that wasn't true.
Yeah.
So that's
So
why we're here.
They may have been renting out, who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's really get clarity on that. Thank you.
So
It was not permitted though.
Okay,
Before, and
No matter what was
it
happening.
is not
Okay,
permitted.
right.
It was an in-law apartment when it was built.
It was, okay.
Prior to anybody, after the house was built, during that process, they were they requested to do a family in-law apartment, which we have no control over.
Sure.
So they just went ahead and did it. So, and that's on record. It was inspected and everything like that. So that's what happened. And then unfortunately, they bought it without the knowledge of that being an illegal apartment. So I'd like to talk with your realtor.
Yeah.
So reconfirming an answer you've already given, there's no physical way to interconnect between the two parts of the house without going outside.
There is a door that you can go to the basement, but we don't, when and if it would be rented, that's not, like, there, I don't know how to say that.
The door
wouldn't-
remains locked, is that?
Yeah.
Is the door necessary for a second exit from the basement apartment?
There's an exit through the, okay. Thanks, Dad.
Well, they have
Sorry.
family visiting, there should be interior
Yeah,
access
yeah.
when they have family visiting, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Summers, did you have anything more to add?
I have nothing further.
Okay. We are going to then close the public session, go into deliberation on the variance. Invite any comments from the board?
Well, my reaction is that if we didn't have this big elephant in the room, it doesn't seem like a real stretch in terms of the amount of space that they're short.
Well, I think that's ultimately the question is, our focus is, the variance relates just to that space, and that's the focus, is what effect does ultimately having a two-unit dwelling, what it have on a lot that's that size, that's slightly undersized by about 700 feet. So I think that's really the question that's before us. I will say, I will note, I certainly understand the neighbors' concerns. I know that neighborhood. It is a really lovely neighborhood. And it's an interesting street because it really varies. I think everyone can answer very accurately when they say that it is that this is sort of incongruous because half of that street, the half towards Front Street, is really single-family larger lots, and then as you get towards Garfield Street, it really it switches over to more 2 and 3 unit and then a couple really large multi-units. So
And the house right next door.
the house
On both sides, actually.
on both sides. Technically the playground for the development of preschools in between, but yeah, the two residents on either side are both duplexes, so or 2 units.
Both on larger lots.
On slightly larger lots, absolutely.
But not by a lot. One of them not by a lot.
And then as you get towards Garfield, there's a few very small.
Right.
Multi-units on very small lots.
Yeah.
So use really isn't part of what we deliberate on?
What's that?
We're not deliberating on use, we're deliberating on size of the lot.
Strictly, are they allowed to have a multifamily on a lot that is undersized? And then we get to, are they allowed to have a multifamily? But we have to approve the lot, first before we can even begin to discuss the special exception.
May I interject? Can we refrain from using the word multifamily?
Two-family.
Two-family.
Thank you.
Yeah, two-family.
Totally different use.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
Shall we?
Yeah, if there are no more comments, you look like you're ready to make a motion, so I will.
For instance, if we turn down, that doesn't mean in 3 weeks, whoever buys that house, say for instance, is going to be back here saying exactly what they want.
Well, I mean, there's pretty clear case law out there that says you can't come back with the same request.
Even if it's a different applicant?
Even with a different
applicant?
Yes, it has to be a material change of, the proposal has to be significantly changed or the circumstances. In 3 weeks, the circumstances.
Well, I know that, but I mean, so how long?
I can't answer that, but the point being is that no one should be able to come right back with the same request.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm just.
Yeah.
And I think should we grant the variance and move on to a special exception, that's an opportunity to introduce some conditions.
I actually would recommend that we introduce the conditions as part of the variance.
Really? Okay.
I do. I think we've discussed it as part of the variance, and I think I think it fits. I don't know that it's a huge deal, but for me, I feel more comfortable if we are going to grant conditions that we do it, as I think my sense is that the conditions that we've discussed are important to getting us to feel comfortable about the size. So.
Fair enough.
I agree.
Okay. The variance criteria. Number one, the variance is not contrary to the public interest, and it's the spirit of the ordinance is observed. So the proposed use must not conflict with the explicit or implicit purpose of the ordinance, and must not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, threaten public health, safety, or welfare, or otherwise injure public rights. I believe that the applicant and their counsel have adequately explained how the essential character of the neighborhood would not be changed by making this from a single-family home into a two-family. There's no exterior change proposed at all to the structure. There is sufficient parking. I'm assuming, or they'd have been asked for parking variance, so I'm assuming that there's sufficient parking for the number of bedrooms that exist. And so I believe that it meets criteria 1 and 2, contrary to the public interest and the spirit of the ordinance is observed.
Are we able to put variances on where people park, or no?
No, we're not. The town has guidance for where you're allowed to park based on, fire access and safety access, et cetera.
So based on what Doug just mentioned, then we're going in the assumption that there's plenty of parking on one side and plenty of parking on the other.
Well, there's a garage, looks like a one-car garage, and then a space in front of the garage on the right-hand side, I assume without blocking the sidewalk, and space for 2 or 3 cars on the left-hand side without blocking you're not allowed to block a sidewalk, so.
Yeah, the bottom line is the ordinance. The ordinance requires, I believe, 4 spaces, and they have 5.
They have 5, right.
Yeah. So that was defined by somebody other than us?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that's not...
To have a conversion, you have to have...
Sorry, I keep trying to charge ahead and talking over you.
That's right. That was described by somebody else rather than us. We're going in the assumption that there are 5 parking spaces there.
I have no reason to think there are not, and if there are not, then that's an enforcement issue for Doug. And I trust.
There are.
Yeah.
Okay. Criteria 3, the substantial justice is done. The benefit to the applicant should not be outweighed by harm to the general public or to other individuals. I frankly see no harm to either the general public or to other individuals. There is a benefit to the applicant, but I see no harm in approving this as a two-family. So I believe it meets criteria 3. Number 4, the values of surrounding properties are not diminished. We have no testimony either way on values except the material that was included from the applicant regarding the values of other multifamily properties or two-family or multifamily, both properties that exist in the area. I do not believe that based on the fact that there's no external change to the structure, that there's any damage to be done to surrounding property values by making this into a two-family in a neighborhood that is composed to some fairly high percentage of multiple family properties already.
I agree.
And final, that little enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. So the fact that the property is 700 and something square feet under is what sets this parcel apart. And that is the hardship, as far as I'm concerned, is that as far as everything's concerned, not just I'm concerned, that the hardship that the applicant faces is the way the lot was originally laid out or subdivided at some point in the past, which was probably in advance of zoning, as far as the criteria on the size of the lots are concerned. So, in my opinion, it does meet the 5 variance criteria.
I would also note, just to add, the fact that this is located next to the developmental preschool and that is an open playground area. It adds some addition, though the lot itself is slightly undersized, it provides an additional buffer to at least the residential abutter on the other side.
Which is itself a two-family.
Which is a two-family.
So let me throw in generally, when you think of a family, you don't think of a family as being one person. And the folks that they're renting to in their longish term renting have so far not really been a family in the broad sense of the word.
I don't think it matters. I mean, when you talk two-family, it's yeah. I mean, you're talking about dwelling units, basically. Yeah. 2 separate, kitchen facilities, bathrooms.
Okay.
The numbers don't really. I mean, other than health code, the numbers don't really.
Right.
And the definition of family is pretty broad.
Yeah.
It should be. Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we approve the application for. Where's my cover sheet? That one, thank you. That we approve the application for a variance from Article 4, Section 4.2, Schedule 1, permitted uses, to permit the proposed conversion with less than the required minimum lot area, with the following conditions. Number 1, and to repeat what is already part of the code, that the property must remain owner-occupied. And second, that the no rental of the property, of either unit on the property shall be for less than 6 months.
Any second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion on the motion or the conditions?
I would like to at least have a brief discussion. I'm always sitting here worrying about precedents, and perhaps 6 months is really a great precedent to set. but are we getting beyond ourselves and the kind of thing we ought to be trying to set?
The applicant has offered it as a condition. I think it's in line with what the building inspector has suggested would be more than a short-term rental. I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, so if the town were to come along later and define short-term rental somehow or other, and these folks were in violation, they'd still be okay. It would just mean that people couldn't come along behind and do the same thing.
You mean if it's defined for more than, is short-term rental is defined as 8 months?
Right.
Is that, no, they would be able to continue.
Right.
Yes.
But it wouldn't prevent the town from making that provision in our
For future conversions.
No.
Okay.
I mean, Frank, personally, I think 6 months is more than reasonable. I mean, a short term, we don't define it as generally discussed as transient, and I think 6 months is well beyond, and it also gives some, a little bit of flexibility to the owner. I think most likely it's going to be, it sounds like it's going to be some family or some longer term, 6 months or a full year or maybe a semester.
Well, they can rent it for longer.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So,
okay, I'm good.
okay. All right. Well, we have a motion. We have a second. Then I'm going to take the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Nay.
Chair votes aye. So 4-1, congratulations. And now we get to move on to the special exception. I assume, Attorney Summers, you will, we can skip the general and go right to the criteria, but of course it's your presentation to make.
So, just for the record, I mean, I am incorporating all my earlier comments about the description of the property. And as the board knows, the special exception criteria for this particular project consist of two different categories. One is the criteria that's set forth on general terms under section or Article 5.2, and then the second category are those criteria that are unique to residential conversions. So because there is a certain amount of overlap between some of the discussion that we just had on the variance, I'll just try to move through this as quickly as possible. So with regard to the criteria under section 5.2, the first criteria is whether or not the use is a permitted special exception as set forth in Article 4.2. This one is, a residential conversion is permitted by special exception within this district, subject to meeting all the specific criteria under the conversions. The second criteria under section 5. Or Article 5.2 is whether or not the use is designed, located, and proposed to be operated so as to protect the public health, safety, welfare, and convenience. As was stated in the variance presentation, we satisfy that criteria because of the fact that the proposed use of the rental conversion to a second dwelling is already established, it's already finished, it's prepared and ready to go as a rental or second dwelling. There's going to be no modifications and no physical alterations to the interior, and therefore there's not going to be anything about this proposal which will do anything other than to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. The next criteria is whether or not the proposed use is compatible with the zone district and adjoining development. The proposal is zoned, or the property is zoned for residential use, and so this is consistent with that proposed use. The proposed two-family use by special exception is permitted. Also, this is compatible, as we've just had much discussion, with the adjoining post-development, in that there are a number of other properties nearby that are either two- or three-family homes. The next criteria is that adequate landscaping and screening are provided. As I've noted several times, the proposed use is not going to require any modifications to the property, and thus there's really no need for any additional landscaping. But that said, we do have adequate landscaping on the property, including fences and shrubs and so forth. The next criteria under Article 5.2 is that there's adequate off-street parking and loading. We've already discussed that, and there is, by virtue of the driveways, the garage, and so forth. And then the next criteria is whether or not the use conforms with all applicable regulations governing the district where it is located. As is noted in the materials, the property is a substandard, lawfully non-conforming lot of record, and we comply with the various requirements, either as a non-conforming or in some circumstances outright, because we comply with the height, maximum building coverage, and open space requirements. The next item is whether or not town planner review and site plan review is necessary. That's not relevant here, since there's not going to be any modifications to the property. The next criteria is whether or not the use is going to adversely affect abutting or nearby property values. I believe that we've covered that already in our discussion with the variance, and the fact that the property is going to essentially remain as it is. The next criteria the next two criteria really are not applicable, since there's not going to be any hazardous material that's potentially explosive used in connection with this property, nor are any of the relevant tax map and lot numbers applied to this property. So those are the general criteria. And then for the specific criteria that apply to the special exception criteria for residential conversions, the first criteria is whether or not the number of off-street parking spaces comply with the off-street parking zoning ordinance. As we've discussed, we do. We have 5 off-street parking spaces, and therefore we comply with that particular provision of the ordinance. The second criteria is that we have applied for a variance from minimum lot size requirements. We've just dealt with that particular issue, so that's been satisfied. The third criteria is whether or not the structure has been a residence for a minimum of 10 years. That is met by virtue of the fact that the structure was built in 2009 and has been continuously used as a residence since that time, either by the owners or their predecessors in title. The next criteria is whether or not we meet the open space requirements. As I stated at the beginning of this presentation for the variance, we not only meet the criteria, but we vastly exceed it. And then the next criteria is whether the conversion is intended to create a rental unit and the second dwelling unit will remain owner-occupied. That is the intent, to create a rental unit, and as we've just discussed, and which has been a subject of condition of approval, this will remain an owner-occupied property. The next criteria is the fact that site review is unnecessary because there are no changes to the property. Likewise, the next criteria is that the applicant does not request an expansion of the existing structure, and therefore that's not applicable. And then finally, for the last criteria, whether or not there are adequate septic facilities to serve both units. This property is on municipal water and sewer, and therefore, that's really not an issue. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions which the board may have with regard to the special exception criteria.
Seeing none, I will open it up to the public. The public is welcome to speak. Again, this is a separate request. I would ask that we keep any comments relevant to the special exception criteria, but anyone who spoke before is welcome to speak again, or anyone who didn't speak is welcome to come up as well. If you just state your name and address for the record again, so we have it for the recording.
Joanna Rom, 105 Front Street. All of these criteria are new to my ears, so I'm trying to remember them as I respond to them. I just wanted to state that we do have more single-family units on the first chunk of Union Street than multifamily. Many of the multifamilies, or of the multifamilies that are there, of which I believe there are only on this first half of the block, because the other half, it's newly part of Union, are not meeting these criteria either. They, I think, are grandfathered in before these state laws came to really protect us from more multifamilies in our residential neighborhoods, and they are absolutely not a part of our neighborhood. These are people among them, there is one who participates. We are a street that closes down. We have block parties. We have progressives at Christmas time. There is one person in one of these multifamilies that participates with us, and the rest of them really operate like strangers. One of the abutters does live in half of a two-family split house. There is a constant rotation of who is also living in there. And it does, I think, bring down not only our property values, but our street, because there are families that have older children who are dealing drugs out of this house. They don't live there anymore, they got removed, but it's a constant battle to have good people renting in some of these houses. One of them, the other abutter, is approved because of their lot size and house size as a two-family, but they don't have a two-family. It's a single-family house and has been for 20 years. What else can I say? My issue is this is setting into motion a two-family home that doesn't exist currently on our street forever for the next people who then want to show up with their little variants of, can it not be owner-occupied? And the ones that aren't are eyesores. And if you go down Union Street, you can see them, and you know who lives in the house and who doesn't, and it will ultimately, potentially, very much impact our property values.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to the application? Thank you. Summers, or if you'd like to, you're welcome to comment, or we're happy to go into deliberation. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing then and go into deliberation. Any comments on the special exception request?
I think as an explanation, the ordinance makes provision for this kind of conversion, and it's often the case that abutters aren't pleased with what the requirements are, but to a large extent, we have to follow the rules, and we're sometimes stuck with a situation where we may personally think an idea is terrible, but the rules provide for it, and the only way those issues can be addressed is by changing the rules, and we can't do that.
Thanks, Rick.
I would also say that the property is going to remain owner-occupied. It is a two-family, and one of the two is going to be the owner of the property. who is going to be on site, is going to have somebody either above them or below them. And so there's tremendous pressure on the owners to maintain the stability of the property and of the neighborhood, whether that's the Creegans or people who might follow on, whoever the next owner might be. This is not a dispassionate sort of thing where you own a property and it's across town and you don't care who's in it. This is going to be owner occupied, and I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on the applicant.
Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Sure. I'll just confirm that the council has, I agree with council that the application does meet all of the special exception and Schedule 1 note for conversions criteria, in my opinion. And so therefore, I would make a motion that we approve the application of Amy and Nicholas Cregan for a special exception per Article 4, Section 4.2, Schedule 1, to permit the residential conversion for one additional unit within the structure located at 14 Union Street.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? I think Chris, did you have a?
So when this goes, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if they're going to get to be, kids who are grown up and done all that, if and when they move out, whoever moves in, depending on whether it's on the basement or the first floor and the second floor is what we're discussing, is going to have to be owner occupied.
That is correct.
So that's the way it's going to. Will that show up on the deed? So when they go to sell it to Mr. Smith, will that show up on the deed?
It doesn't go on the deed, but it's part of the town records and is.
I don't want to end up with them, nothing personal, about them selling the house and the next person
saying, I don't know, I
Right.
didn't know. Yeah, I mean, that's, we don't record various approvals,
nothing of this will go on the deed as the way it stands now.
As a two-family.
But it will go on the it will likely go on the tax records. It will certainly be in the records of the building department.
So as far as they are concerned, them selling and going down to somebody else's house, it would be with Doug, whoever else is following you. So that would be on record, so that no matter who moves in, is going to be owner occupied.
That is correct.
Well, and it would be possible for the abutters to get a copy of that document. And it sounds as if the neighbors are quite interested in maintaining the neighborhood.
Half
I
of the
actually
neighborhood.
think this 6-month restriction will do that to a very great extent. And they'll watch. And all they have to do is call up Doug and say, hey, this isn't what was agreed.
Because I've lived near Union Street, and I have a funny feeling that most of Front Street is going to change on the other side. So they might want to think about what's going on in Front Street and what's going on in Gill Street and the rest while you're thinking about your street. So
It's funny, I usually give the speeches from up here.
I grew up across the street on Front Street, and I know that at one time my house was going to go from a doctor's house with 2 grandmothers upstairs, and now it's not 3, but 4 condominiums.
Wow.
And I know down the street, there's another house that could have three house lots in the back and have the house lot in the front.
Yeah.
So,
Chris, sorry to interrupt. I mean,
Oh,
I
go
would
ahead.
say to Rick's point, I mean, that's what the ordinance permits.
no, I know, but I'm just gonna
And
say,
so-
they might wanna keep, not only on Union Street, but Garfield and some of the other ones, you're gonna wanna keep an eye on what goes on there.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Sorry, the public session is over. I'm going to call the vote, and we have a motion, we have a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
All right?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So congratulations, special exception has been granted. At this point, I am going to stand down and turn the meeting over to my vice chair, Mr. Pryor, for the second application. I'm going to let you jump in. I'm going to, because it's the end of the meeting, and because I'm going to have a late night again tomorrow, I'm going to leave. I had no comments on the minutes.
So you're all set on the minute?
I'm all set on the minutes. I didn't see anything.
Okay.
So,
All right. So the second order of business is the application of CKT Associates for a variance from Article 4, Section 4.2, Schedule I, permitted uses, to permit an age-restricted residential use for the proposed relocation of Building D in the Ray Farm Active Adult Community to be located on Ray Farmstead Road. Subject property is located in the C3 Epping Road Highway Commercial Zoning District. Tax map parcel 47-8.1. This is ZBA case 21-12.
No.
Should we
So all of us.
get Mr. Passay?
Maybe we could just go home. What do you think?
I think so. Would somebody, Chris, would you mind sticking your head into Doug's office?
I gotta go through the other con.
We're on.
So all 5 of us are voting on this.
Let's wait for Mr. Passay. I've just opened the case, sir.
Sorry for my.
Not a problem.
And it's also, I mean.
All right, so I just read the case in and I've opened it. Moving forward, so 1, 2, 3, all 5 of us are voting members since Mr. Baum has had to recuse himself.
I appreciate that, and it's unorthodox what I'm about to do, but we've spent the last hour talking, and this is our first hearing before the board, and by virtue of the discussion that we've had, and certainly not to put anybody out who's in this room, we would like to continue the hearing because I have a feeling we're going to supplement our application. I think it's appropriate by virtue of the fact that it's our first hearing tonight, and by, as I said, because of the discussions that we just had, I think we're going to end up supplementing our application before we start talking in public. I want to have all of our bases covered. So I would request at this time, Mr. Acting Chairman, for a continuance to the November hearing if the board would entertain that.
Certainly. Are there any questions members of the board would like to ask of council before we entertain that? Or should we just simply continue to next month?
I have 2 very short comments. The first is that when we filed this application, I had a conversation with Doug Eastman. I understand Doug reached out to Attorney Walter Mitchell, who's obviously the town council here in Exeter, and there was some discussion about implications of our application on the future of the TIF road, et cetera. I guess my suggestion would be that if we have more time, and if that's something that the board wants to hear from Attorney Mitchell on, that might be a good use of the time. That's the first thing. The second one was that there's a lot of people here. Mr. Blackett and Mr. Schaffmaster, my clients, asked me to extend to the group of people here an invitation to discuss any concerns that they have about the application and to get together either now, acknowledging the late hour, or at some point in the next couple of weeks before we come back in November. So I just thought I'd put that out there.
And I assume you'll also be addressing the letter that was delivered today.
Correct.
As well. Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to continue this to the November meeting?
I so move.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of continuing the application of CKT Associates, which is ZBA case 21-12 until November, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Continue to November, Mr. Passay.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you.
Are we going to be notifying abutters, indicating that the meeting will be moved, and there's a lot of people here, I think, who are
Well, traditionally, the formal continuance to a certain date, time, and in place in the future is the notice that's provided. So I wouldn't imagine re-notifying, but I don't know. Well, maybe we should do that, Mr. Chairman. I don't have the date of the next ZBA hearing in front of me. Maybe we can pull it up, and maybe Doug knows that off the top of his head.
November
20th.
20?
Thanksgiving Day. We'll be here on Thanksgiving.
Yes. Having turkey then.
That's right. So
I'm
November
sorry,
20th.
I don't know.
You have made an offer to speak to these folks outside of the zoning board meeting.
Absolutely.
And they all showed up today, but re-noticing them isn't going to respond to your offer.
Correct.
They need to know who to call, when to call, how to call, whatever.
Certainly. So what we'll do is and it's November 16th.
November 16th,
okay.
correct.
So I assume it's going to be the Novak room at 7 p.m. on November 16th
Correct.
for the continuance.
Same time, same place.
And before anyone leaves, I'm going to grab Bill Blackett, who's John Schaffmaster's right hand and who's frequently at these association meetings. I'm sure most of the people in this room know him anyways. And we will divine a way to get in touch with him, maybe pass out business cards, or just provide email addresses and phone numbers so that anyone who wants to talk will have the opportunity to do that, if that sounds okay.
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 We're going to throw you out of here when you're done.
Right.
Okay.
So, for everyone in the room, then, this discussion is continued until November 16th. Same time, same place, 7 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Thank you all for coming out this evening.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment about the notification process?
No, actually, because it's a legal process.
None of us were notified.
We were not notified.
Well, you're not butters.
Yes, we are butters.
Yes, you wouldn't be individually notified as one individual.
Please go ahead, Mr.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No. I'm letting you handle it.
That the association is the appropriate
Legal entity.
notification. So it would go to whoever's the president of your association, and then it's up to them to notify you. We would not notify you. What's that?
They failed to notify us.
We only found out through a series of questions.
We were never notified.
So who is the president? Who is the president? Oh, so you're in process of taking over because he's still so Bill is still the.
No, we're not taking over anything, but now that we know this is in the air, because this was not shared with us, now that we know about it, we'll make sure that we know when the next meetings are.
Okay, so that will be.
Certainly that miscommunication will be one of, I'm sure, a number of things that will be addressed in the interim between now and November 16th.
Okay.
May I ask, what property do most of you live at?
The actual place.
It's two buildings,
7 Willie Creek.
24 and 7.
So there's not a name, it's Ray Farm LLC, Shattuck Way, Newington? Is that, yeah.
Shattuck Way, yeah.
That's the condominium and the declarant of the condominium, yeah.
Right, CKT Associates, 3 different, you're right. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Passay.
We have one more question.
Sir.
You said that something was delivered to you all tonight.
Correct.
Are we allowed to see that?
Would that letter have been sent to?
Well, I think it's a public document at this point, right?
It is. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it. What I was referring to, sir, is that there was a letter sent to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, was received October 19th, dated October 19th from Upton and Hatfield, which is a law firm in Portsmouth, regarding an issue with a right-of-way. So it's probably something that you should have access to, but I don't know how.
Well, I think you've just read it. That's what it's all about.
Where can we get a copy?
In our office.
In the copies would be available. Again, this is the type of document that should be provided to abutters or not? No. Yeah, I know. Probably not.
I'm almost the letter was I don't know.
The letter is inappropriately late, given the fact that it's dated the same day as the hearing. And I think that there's quite a bit of legal material in, please don't interrupt. There's quite a bit of legal material in here that we would not have had time to acknowledge or digest properly. So I would say that anyone who's interested could obtain a copy from the code enforcement officer, from the building and planning department.
I will consult with our attorney.
As to whether this is something that needs to be.
This is attorney-client privilege or what? But I mean, it will come out eventually. You will see it eventually, but before I let anything out.
I just want to make a clarification, since there seems to be quite a bit of muttering in the room. The criteria for who gets notified is set forward by state statute. And it defines very clearly who is to be notified, what is the definition of an abutter. And in this case, there's an extensive list of abutters that were in fact notified, and the clarification needs to be made if you're a resident in a condominium or in an apartment building, you're not notified individually. We have no way of knowing who each person is in each unit. The condominium association or the ownership of the property, if it's a rental unit, is who is notified. How their interests are the same as yours, right? But in the eyes of the law, they are.
But are they obligated to notify?
No.
So they are not obligated?
No. A condominium association is slightly different. I don't know whether you're in a condominium or an apartment. If you're in they're all condos. Then the condominium association should have been notified, and the condominium association then use this as a discussion you should have with the officers of the condominium association.
The Shattuck Way address you have is for the builder developer, not for the association.
That's the legal address that's on file.
For the association.
Yes.
That's correct. That's correct.
So you cannot send something to the management company that manages the association?
Not the management company.
Nope.
Okay.
No, it has to be the legal address that's on file.
All right.
All right.
All of this is good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. We try to do our best. I think we're all done for this evening.
I think you guys might want to get his name and how you can contact him.
Yes.
Actually, I'd appreciate, Mr. Passay, our business is not done, so if you would like to have, anyone who'd like to speak to the developer this evening, please do so outside or perhaps even downstairs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a feeling we'll see some of you in November.
I don't see how you guys qualify for 55 or older. Get serious.
Good for you.
I'm saying, we'll get
You're pretty young, huh?
That I don't know.
What was the
Do
question?
they become, are they the first item on the agenda next month?
Generally, continued cases are, but I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. Thank you. You're welcome.
And if they are on, they'll probably be first.
Probably. Okay, we have one more piece of business to go over, guys. I hope you enjoyed your evening sitting and watching us.
I did.
He bears a startling resemblance to Oliver Sacks. Do you know that? Do you know who Oliver Sacks is?
No, I don't.
Well, you would want to, because he's an incredibly famous writer. He's deceased, unfortunately, but you bear a startling resemblance to Oliver Sacks.
You know what?
He didn't have a Marine Corps hat because he was British, but
If I could write, it would be
be all set.
a long stretch.
Be all set. So the last item of business is the approval of minutes. Mr. Baum said he had no questions. The other people here who are here are myself, Rick, Chris, and Ann.
I have one question.
Sir.
Let me find it. And you said it, I think. No, maybe Kevin. Line 92.
Sir.
The board needs to take.
It's a business condition.
Mr. Parsons.
Is it a business condition or a business decision?
Wait a minute.
You're correct. decision.
Very good.
I think.
I think you're correct, too. It is. It's a business decision.
Anyhow, that's all I had.
Yep. So, Mr. Thielbar's correction, just reading in for the record, since I assume this is going to be, Joanna's going to hear this recording, is that the last word in line 92 should be decision rather than condition.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the September 21st, 2021 meeting as amended.
Second?
Second.
You can't second. You're the acting chairman.
He's asking for a second.
I asked for a second. Mr. Merrill seconded.
Oh, I didn't hear him. He mumbled.
Jeez, tough audience here. Thank you, Mr. Passay.
Thank you very much.
Moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Approved 4-0 as amended. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye. Nicely done.
Crash.
Which part of this crap do I need to keep? Let's see, I'm going to work.
Well, clearly 21-12.
I think I'm going to wait till I get home.
Thank you for tuning in to Exeter TV. Exeter TV is the town's public and government access channels, available on Comcast channels 98 and 22. Channel 98 is your channel. If you have an idea for a program, want to host your own talk show, or submit a film, we're here to get your content on television. On Channel 22, we bring you live and replay coverage of government meetings and other town updates. A third channel, Blue Hawk Media, is operated by SAU 16 and can be found on Channel 13, with all your school sports, events, and meetings. You can watch Exeter TV online at exeternh.tv, Apple TV, and on Roku. Find us on social media for extra content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell to get notified about live streams and new content. Tune in to our platforms every other Friday to watch the Exeter Biweekly Report, with recaps of recent events, updates from town departments, and messages from nonprofits in your area. If you head to our website, exeternh.tv, we invite you to sign up to our newsletter to receive monthly updates about new content, upcoming meetings, and more. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch Exeter TV and hope that you tune in to our other content as well.